To the only woman I ever loved, his living wife sat 12 inches away. In a room full of candlelight and pearls, before 200 witnesses, a husband raised his glass and destroyed his marriage with 8 words. Every woman in that room felt it. That specific bone-deep humiliation of being invisible to the one man who was supposed to choose you. Catherine Livingston had given 3 years of her life to Nathaniel Whitmore. That night she gave him nothing more. If you've ever loved someone who looked right through you, stay with me. Virginia, Whitmore Hall, Autumn, 1815. The candles were burning low by the time Nathaniel Whitmore rose from his chair. 200 guests filled the grand dining hall of Whitmore estate senators, landowners, their powdered wives, their dutiful daughters. Crystal caught the firelight. Silver gleamed on linen so white it hurt to look at. The air carried roasted pheasant, warmed brandy, and the particular kind of tensions that gathers in a room full of people who have perfected the art of pretending nothing is wrong. Catherine Livingston Whitmore sat at her husband's right hand. She wore ivory silk, her dark hair dressed high and pinned with a modest strand of pearls. Her posture was flawless. It had been flawless since she was 7 years old, when her mother first pressed a book between her shoulder blades and told her that a woman's bearing was the first thing a man noticed and the last thing he forgot. She had spent her whole life being noticed for the wrong reasons. Nathaniel stood. The room quieted the way rooms always quieted for him, naturally, effortlessly, the way silence falls when something large moves through a space. He was broad-shouldered and dark-eyed, with the easy authority of a man who had inherited not just land but the unquestioned right to occupy it. He lifted his glass. Catherine lifted hers. Around the table 200 people waited. He turned. Not toward her. His eyes moved past her, past the flowers she had arranged that morning, past photos she occupied, past 3 years of her life, and came to rest on the far wall of the dining room. On the portrait, Eleanor Whitmore had been dead for 4 years. In the painting above the fireplace, she was 26, rendered in blues and golds, her pale hair loose around her shoulders, in a way that no respectable woman would ever wear in public. The painter had caught something in her eyes, a private amusement, a secret warmth that made the portrait feel less like art and more like a window into a room Catherine was not permitted to enter. Nathaniel looked at Eleanor the way men in novels looked at women they loved. Then he spoke. To the only woman I ever loved. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Before it had been expectant, now it was horrified. And beneath the horror Catherine could feel it. She had always been extraordinarily good at reading a room was a kind of shameful relief. The relief of people who are grateful the terrible thing happened to someone else. She did not move. She did not flinch. She raised her glass with every other person at that table, and she drank. The wine was excellent. She noted that distantly, the way a person notes small details when the larger thing is too enormous to hold. Nathaniel had ordered it specifically from a Virginia vintner he had trusted for 30 years. She had helped him write the correspondence. Across the table, Margaret Holt, wife of Senator Holt, a woman Catherine had never trusted and never would met her eyes for one terrible moment. Margaret's expression held something between pity and satisfaction, which was perhaps the cruelest combination a human face could produce. Catherine looked away first, not because she was ashamed, because she refused to give Margaret Holt the pleasure of watching her break. The guests departed before midnight. Catherine stood in the entrance hall and bid each of them good night. She smiled. She pressed hands. She said all the right things in all the right tones. She had been raised for exactly this, for the performance of grace, under conditions that were, in every practical sense, unbearable. Lovely evening, Mrs. Whitmore. Quite a remarkable home you keep, ma'am. You must be so proud of your husband's tribute. Such devotion. Such sentiment. That last one came from Dorothea Alcott, who was 80 years old and had survived 3 husbands, and who looked at Catherine with eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop pretending. There was no pity in Dorothea's face, only recognition. My first husband toasted his hunting dog at our wedding supper, Dorothea said quietly, pressing Catherine's hand with papery fingers. I outlived him by 41 years, my dear. Men are remarkably short-lived when left to their own devices. Then she was gone, and Catherine was left standing in the entrance hall alone, listening to the sound of carriage wheels retreating down the gravel drive, thinking about 41 years. She found Nathaniel in his study. He was standing at the window with his back to the door, still holding his glass, And for a moment Catherine simply looked at him. She had loved this man. She wanted to be clear about that, if only to herself in the privacy of her own mind. She had not married him for his estate or his title or the security his name provided, though she had been advised to consider all of those things. She had married him because of an afternoon in her father's garden when he had sat with her for 3 hours discussing the nature of grief, and she had thought, this is a man who feels things deeply. She had not understood then that feeling things deeply could become a kind of cage not just for him, but for everyone who loved him. Nathaniel, he turned. His expression was, and this was the thing that finally, irrevocably, finished something in her chest, confused. Not guilty, not ashamed. Confused the way a man looks when he is interrupted mid-thought and cannot immediately locate the source of the interruption. Catherine, he set his glass down. You should rest. It was a long evening, it was, she agreed. Something in her voice made him still. Are you with something amiss this evening? She looked at him for a long moment. At the dark eyes, the strong jaw, the slight furrow between his brows that appeared when he was attempting to solve a problem he could not quite identify. You toasted Eleanor. He stopped. Yes, it was 4 years ago this week, Catherine. The anniversary. I know what anniversary it is. She kept her voice even. She had worked very hard over 3 years at keeping her voice even. I have kept your household for 3 years, Nathaniel. I know every date on your calendar. Then you understand. What I understand, Catherine said, very carefully, is that you raised your glass before 200 guests. Guests I invited. Guests I spent 6 weeks corresponding with, arranging accommodations for, planning menus for. And you used that moment in front of all of them. In front of Senator Holt and his wife and the Alcott family. And every family in this county who will be discussing tonight at their own dinner tables for 6 months. She paused. You used that moment to make it clear that I am not the woman you love. Nathaniel opened his mouth. I am not asking you to love me, she continued before he could speak. I have never asked that. But I am telling you what happened tonight, because I think you may not fully understand what you did. He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house a door closed softly, a servant retiring for the night. I loved her very much, Nathaniel said finally. And his voice, when he said it, was so raw, so entirely unguarded, that Catherine felt something that was almost not quite, but almost compassion. I know you did. He stopped, looked at the ceiling. She was everything to me. And she was gone before I had any chance to. Nathaniel, Catherine's voice was quiet. I am not Eleanor. I know that, do you? The question hung between them. He did not answer. She had not expected him to. Good night, she said. She walked upstairs alone. She sat at her dressing table and removed her pearls one by one, setting each on the velvet tray with the particular care she gave to everything in this house. And she looked at her own face in the mirror. She had a fine face. She had been told so often enough by her mother, by old friends, by women who meant it kindly and men who meant it as a kind of offering. Dark eyes, a strong nose, a mouth that one former suitor had once described as made for laughing, which is a shame because you almost never do. She was 31 years old. She had arrived at Whitmore Hall at 28, newly married and quietly hopeful, and she had spent 3 years making herself useful, making herself pleasant, making herself, she admitted it now, in the privacy of the mirror small enough to fit into the space that remained after Eleanor. She had been a fool, not a stupid fool, that at least. She had always understood the terms of what she had married into. Nathaniel Whitmore was a grieving man who needed a capable partner, and she was a practical woman who needed a stable home, and between those two truths they had constructed something that looked, from the outside, like a marriage. But tonight, she had watched herself disappear in a room full of people. And something in her she had been carefully, methodically smothering for 3 years, had simply refused. She set down the last pearl. She did not cry. Instead, she opened the small drawer at the right side of the dressing table and took out a piece of correspondence that had arrived 2 weeks ago. A letter from a woman named Harriet Caldwell, who ran a small school in the village of Hatcher's Mill, 12 miles from Whitmore Hall. Harriet was looking for someone to help expand the school's programs. Someone with education, with organizational ability, with time to give. She had not answered it yet. She answered it now. In the weeks that followed, Catherine changed the way rivers change, not all at once, not visibly, but with a persistence that eventually reshapes everything it touches. She stopped waiting at breakfast. She had done it for 3 years, arranged herself at the table at 7 o'clock, poured the coffee at the precise temperature Nathaniel preferred, set out the papers he liked to read with the relevant pages uppermost. Some mornings he arrived. Some mornings he did not. She had always waited regardless. She stopped. She took her coffee in the morning room overlooking the east garden, and she read her own correspondence, and she found that mornings were considerably more pleasant than she had previously understood them to be. She went to Hatcher's Mill on a Tuesday in the Whitmore carriage, without mentioning to anyone that she was going. Harriet Caldwell turned out to be a small, fierce woman of about 60, with ink-stained fingers and the direct gaze of someone who had spent decades looking at children and had long since lost patience for adult pretense. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Harriet said, shaking her hand. "Women in your position don't often come." "Women in my position have a great deal of time," Catherine replied. Harriet looked at her for a moment. Then, apparently satisfied by something she saw, she opened the schoolhouse door and waved her inside. The school occupied a single room with a leaking roof, 14 children between the ages of 5 and 13, 2 slates, and an ambition that far outstripped its resources. By the end of the afternoon, Catherine had promised to source additional slates, arrange for a carpenter to repair the roof, and return the following Tuesday with a plan for expanding instruction to include girls who had previously been excluded because their families believed female education was a luxury. On the carriage ride home, for the first time in months, she felt like herself. Nathaniel noticed the coffee first. He came down at 7:15 on a Wednesday to find the table empty of everything except his own place setting, and he stood there for a moment, with the particular blankness of a man encountering evidence that the world is not precisely as he assumed. "Where is Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked Dawson, the butler. "In the morning room, sir. She breakfasted early." A pause. "Is she unwell?" "She appeared quite well, sir. She was writing correspondence when I last attended her." He ate his breakfast alone. He found he didn't enjoy it as much as he would have expected. He noticed the tenants second. He rode out that Friday on his usual circuit of the estate, a habit he had maintained since inheriting the property at 22, and found himself arriving at several cottages where the necessary repairs had already been completed. Roofs he had intended to address before winter. A well that had needed new stonework since spring. Mrs. Whitmore arranged it, Thomas Fenwick told him, leaning on his fence post with the comfortable manner of a man who has recently stopped worrying about his roof. "She came out 3 weeks ago, talked to all of us, made a list. Sent men from the village 2 weeks back, she did. Good woman, your wife." Thomas said it simply, without any particular emphasis, which somehow made it strike harder than if he had labored the point. "My youngest has been learning her letters at the school she's helping. Child can read 4 whole pages now. You should see her face." Nathaniel rode home slower than he had ridden out. He noticed the servants third, or rather, he noticed a change in them that he could not quite name. Only that when Catherine walked through a room, the household moved differently than it had before, with more purpose, with something that was not quite deference and not quite affection, but existed somewhere usefully between the two. "She knows every one of their names," his housekeeper, Mrs. Potts, said when he happened to mention it. "Their families, too. She asked after my sister in Norfolk. Remembered to ask again when I told her the sister was unwell. That sort of thing matters to people, sir." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I suppose it does." He stood in the doorway of the kitchen longer than was strictly necessary. He had the uncomfortable sensation of a man who has walked the same path for years and only now noticed the landscape. He saw her at dinner on a Thursday in late November. He saw her in the way he had not seen her. He was being honest with himself now, because the alternative was a cowardice he didn't respect possibly in 3 years. She was talking with his cousin Frederick about the school in Hatcher's Mill, and there was something alive in her face that he had not seen there before, or had seen and not registered, which amounted to the same failure. "You should see the progress the children have made," she was telling Frederick, and her voice held a warmth he recognized without knowing precisely why. "One of the girls, her name is Alice. She's 8 years old. She could not read a single word in September. Last week she read me a full passage from the Bible. Her mother cried." Frederick, who had always liked Catherine considerably more than he had ever bothered to mention to Nathaniel, leaned forward on his elbows with the ease of a man listening to something genuinely interesting. "You clearly have a gift for this sort of thing. "I have a great deal of time," she said, and smiled, and the smile did not quite reach her eyes. In the way it would have 3 years ago, there was something in it now that was less hopeful and more decided, which was a different thing entirely. Nathaniel watched this exchange from the far end of the table. He waited for an opportunity to speak with her alone after dinner. She was gone before he found one, not impolitely, not with any evident intention of avoiding him, just gone, as efficiently as she had apparently learned to arrange everything else in her life. He stood in the empty doorway of the parlor and felt, for the first time, the cold, peculiar weight of a room from which someone has just departed. December arrived with frost. Nathaniel found himself rearranging his morning schedule without entirely intending to. He came down at 6:50 instead of 7:15. He found Catherine in the morning room with her coffee and her correspondence, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway with an expression of genuine surprise, not displeasure, but surprise, which was somehow worse, because it told him how firmly she had stopped expecting him. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She set down her pen. "Is something needed?" "No, I thought I might." He stopped. The sentence he had begun, no proper ending. And he was experienced enough to know when he was standing at the edge of something he hadn't fully thought through. "I thought I might take coffee in here this morning. If you'd prefer. Of course." She gestured at the chair across from hers. "Sit." He sat. The morning room was smaller than the dining room, and without 200 guests between them, the distance was considerably harder to manage. The fire was modest. The curtains were open to the east garden, where frost had rendered the last of the autumn flowers into something fragile and silver. "The Fenwick roof is holding," he offered. "It should. I made sure they used proper slate." Thomas mentioned. A pause. "He spoke very highly of you. Thomas is a kind man." He said. Nathaniel stopped again. Then, more carefully, he said you'd come out and spoken with all the tenants. Made a list. "The estate has 12 families depending on it," Catherine said. It seemed sensible to know their situations. She said it without accusation, which was its own form of indictment. He drank his coffee. She returned briefly to her correspondence. The fire settled. "Catherine," he said. She looked up. The word he needed was not coming. He had always been more comfortable with silence than with the kinds of words that expose the interior of a thing. Eleanor had understood that about him. She had filled his silences with her own warmth, and he had let her, and he had never once understood how much of his own expression he had outsourced to her willingness to speak. Now she was gone, and Catherine, he was beginning to understand, had never been given the space to fill anything. "I want to tell you something." She waited. Her face was composed, patient, entirely closed to him. "The evening of the dinner," he said. "What I said. You don't need to. I do." The words came out harder than he intended. He tried. "I do need to. Because I have been," he set his cup down. "I have been attempting to think clearly about that evening, and I keep arriving at the same conclusion, which is that I behaved very badly. Not for the first time, but in a way that was particularly," he stopped. "It was witnessed. That made it worse." It did. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and there was nothing in her expression he could read. Not hurt, not anger, not forgiveness, not warmth. Only a kind of patient steadiness that he recognized, suddenly, as the face of a woman who has already made a decision and is now simply waiting for the conversation to catch up to it. "I'm sorry," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I know you are," she said at last. "Is that—" He didn't finish the question. She picked up her pen. "I should finish this letter before 8, she said. "I'm going to Hatcher's Mill this morning." He left the morning room with his coffee half finished and the particular vertigo of a man who has just understood, for the first time, that apologizing and being forgiven are not the same thing, and that the distance between them can be very, very wide. She was in the library on a Sunday afternoon in late December, organizing a collection of children's primers she had ordered for the school, when he appeared in the doorway. He had ridden out earlier and come back windburned and quieter than usual, and he stood in the doorway looking at the stacks of books around her feet, with an expression she could not read. "May I help?" She looked up. He was still in his riding coat. She had been alone with these books for 2 hours, and had, she admitted, been perfectly content. "If you like." He crouched down and picked up a primer, turned it over in his hands. "Eleanor couldn't read," he said, without any particular preamble. Catherine went still. She was educated, of course, but she never took to letters. She found them frustrating. He set the primer down. She used to ask me to read aloud to her in the evenings. I hadn't thought of that in a while. Catherine resumed sorting books. What did you read to her? Poishly. She liked Scott. Anything with good rhythm, a pause. She had an extraordinary memory for music. She could hear a melody once and recall it perfectly for years. He was quiet for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. She was extraordinary. I know he stopped. Started again. I know that my grief has been Nathaniel. Her voice was not unkind. You don't have to explain Eleanor to me. I think I do. I think I owe you that at least. She looked at him. He was kneeling on the library floor in his riding coat, surrounded by children's primers, and he looked for the first time since she had known him genuinely uncertain. Not the uncertainty of a man working through a problem. The uncertainty of a man who has reached the edge of what he knows, and is no longer sure the ground extends beyond it. She died, he said quietly, very quickly. There was no I didn't have time to. He pressed his hand flat against the cover of a primer. There are things I never said. I kept waiting for the right moment, and then there was no moment, and she was gone, and I have spent 4 years trying to say them anyway. To a portrait, to an empty room, he looked up. I know how that sounds. It sounds, Catherine said carefully, like grief. Yes, he sat back, I suppose it does. She set down the books she was holding. She sat not across from him, but near him on the floor, back against the bookshelf, with the same easy practicality she applied to everything. Because there was no chair conveniently placed, and she had long since stopped requiring the formalities of position. I understand grief, she said. My mother died when I was 12. My father when I was 23. There were things I never said to either of them. She looked at the books between them. Grief doesn't go away because you've found something else. It just makes room eventually, if you let it. He looked at her. Not the way he looked at Eleanor's portrait. Not with that raw, consuming, backward-facing love. With something different, with the attention of a man who is seeing a thing clearly for the first time and is not entirely sure what to do with what he sees. Catherine, he said. She picked up a primer. We should finish sorting these. I'm taking them to Harriet on Tuesday. He picked up a primer too. They sorted books in silence, for the better part of an hour, and when they were done, and Catherine rose and carried the first stack to the crate by the door, Nathaniel held the crate steady without being asked. It was a small thing. She noticed it. She did not let herself believe it meant what she wished it meant, because she was 31 years old, and she had spent 3 years learning the cost of that particular mistake. But she noticed it. The frost hardened into January. Catherine received 2 invitations that month, one from Harriet Caldwell to join the school's Board of Oversight, a formal position with actual authority, and one from a woman named Louise Pemberton in Richmond, who was organizing support for families affected by a particularly hard winter, and had heard of Catherine's work through the Fenwick family. She accepted both. She did not mention either to Nathaniel, not as a deliberate omission, simply because she had stopped gradually, quietly, without quite deciding to framing her life around what he would or would not want to know about it. She was at the school in Hatcher's Mill on a Tuesday afternoon, helping Alice Fenwick practice her reading, when she heard little Alice sound out a difficult word 3 times and then, on the 4th attempt, get it exactly right. The child's face broke open with a joy so uncomplicated and complete that Catherine felt it in her own chest, clean and warm and entirely unconnected to any man's opinion of her. She sat with that feeling for a moment. This is mine, she thought. This is something he cannot toast away. And something she had been carrying for a very long time. Some particular tension in the vicinity of her heart quietly, almost imperceptibly, began to release. She did not yet know what she would do with the space it left behind. But for the first time in 3 years, the space felt like possibility rather than absence. She held Alice Fenwick's small hand and listened to her read. Outside, the January wind moved through Virginia without asking permission, and Catherine Livingston Whitmore, for the first time since the night her husband had toasted a dead woman in front of 200 living witnesses, felt something she recognized as the first tentative edge of peace. She did not know yet what was coming. She did not know that Nathaniel Whitmore was standing in his library at that exact moment, looking at Eleanor's portrait, not the large one above the dining room fireplace, but the small one he kept in the drawer of his desk, and understanding, with the slow, terrible clarity of a man who has arrived at an important truth several years too late, exactly what he had done. She did not know that something was shifting. She only knew that she had made a choice, not loudly, not in any single dramatic moment, but in all the accumulated small moments of the past weeks. She had chosen herself. What that choice would cost them both, she was not yet ready to know. What happens next in Whitmore Hall will break your heart before it puts it back together. If you've ever had to choose between loving someone and loving yourself, you already know this story. Subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Catherine's story is just beginning. February arrived the way it always did in Virginia, without apology, without warmth, without any particular interest in the feelings of the people it found there. Catherine had been awake since 5. Not because she was troubled. That was the thing she had noticed quietly. Over the past several weeks, the mornings no longer felt like bracing herself. She rose because she wanted to, because the hours before the house stirred belonged entirely to her, and she had discovered in those hours a version of herself she had nearly forgotten existed. A woman who had opinions about things. A woman who made decisions without first measuring them against someone else's silence. She was at her writing desk when she heard the sound footsteps on the stair, too heavy for a servant, moving with the particular deliberateness of a man who has somewhere to be and is not entirely certain he should be going there. The footsteps stopped outside the morning room door. Then, after a pause that lasted longer than it needed to, a knock. "Come in." Nathaniel entered. He was dressed for riding, which meant he had been up even earlier than she had, which meant something had kept him from sleeping, which she noted and filed away without comment. He looked at her desk, at the correspondence spread across it, at the 2 empty cups that told him she had already refilled her own coffee and had not thought to leave the pot. "I've had a letter," he said. She set down her pen. His voice had the particular quality it acquired when he was managing something, keeping it level, keeping it controlled, which in Nathaniel's case was nearly always. But there were degrees, and she had become very good at reading them. From whom? Frederick. He came into the room fully, which was new, in the old months, and she was already beginning to think of the first 3 years as the old months. He would have stood in the doorway, delivered the information, and retreated. Now he came to stand near the window, close enough to the fire to suggest he intended to stay. He's heard talk. What kind of talk? It wasn't a question exactly. She already knew the answer in its general shape. Gossip in a Virginia county moved faster than weather and was considerably less predictable in where it chose to land. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. The kind that follows a man who makes a toast in front of 200 witnesses. The room was quiet. "What specifically?" she said. "That I am." He stopped, started again. "That you and I are, that the marriage is another stop." He pressed his hand against the window frame. "That you have been seen on multiple occasions, conducting yourself in public without my escort or knowledge. That you have taken up activities that some members of this county consider unbecoming. For a woman of your position." Catherine sat very still. Then, carefully and deliberately, she picked up her pen again. "And what do you consider unbecoming?" He turned from the window. "That is not what because I should like to know." Her voice was even. Perfectly, maddeningly even. "If you have come to ask me to stop what I have been doing, the school, the board, the relief work for the Pemberton families, I should like you to say so plainly. So I can answer you plainly. I have not come to ask you to stop." "Then what have you come to say?" The fire crackled between them. Nathaniel looked at her, at the straight spine, the composed hands, the pen held with the same steady grip she applied to everything, and something in his expression shifted. Not softened, exactly, recalibrated. "Frederick says that Margaret Holt is telling people you have become eccentric." Margaret Holt. Yes, Catherine set the pen down. Then she did something Nathaniel had never seen her do before. Not in 3 years of mornings and dinners and careful, managed silences. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the kind she produced at dinner parties, but a real one, short and genuine and entirely free of self-consciousness. "Margaret Holt," she said again, "called me eccentric to my face at the Alcott Christmas gathering." She said it within earshot of Dorothea Alcott, who told her that eccentric women outlived conventional ones by at least a decade, and then helped herself to more cake. I liked her enormously for it. Nathaniel stared at her. "You're not concerned about Margaret Holt?" She picked up her pen again. "I am categorically not concerned about Margaret Holt." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him recalibrating again, trying to locate the woman he had expected to find in this room and failing to find her. "The talk will affect the estate," he said. "Our position in the county." "The estate," Catherine said, "currently has 12 families living on it, whose roofs are repaired, whose children are learning to read, and whose wells are functioning. 3 of those improvements happened in the last 6 weeks, while the county was discussing my eccentricity. I suspect the Fenwick family finds the roof considerably more relevant than Margaret Holt's opinions. Longer this silence. "You have changed," Nathaniel said. She looked up. He opened his mouth, closed it. There was something working in his face that she recognized the particular struggle of a man who came into a conversation, prepared for one kind of woman and has found another entirely. "I will manage the talk," he said finally. "Frederick will help. If you choose to do that, it is entirely your decision." She looked back at her correspondence. "It won't affect what I do. I want to be clear about that." He left without responding. She listened to his footsteps go down the hall and felt not triumph, not satisfaction, but something cleaner and more self-respecting. The simple, solid feeling of a woman who knows her own mind and has declined to apologize for it. She finished the letter to Louise Pemberton. She was at the school by 9. It was Harriet Caldwell who first understood what was actually happening. Harriet had the particular gift, common to schoolteachers and rare everywhere else, of seeing directly to the center of a thing without flinching at what she found there. She and Catherine were reviewing enrollment numbers on a Wednesday afternoon. 14 children had become 22 since September, a fact that made both women quietly proud when Harriet set down her papers and looked at Catherine with the expression of someone who has decided to say something. "He's been asking about you." Catherine kept her eyes on the enrollment ledger. "Who has your husband?" "He came by the school 3 days ago. Said he was riding through." Harriet folded her hands. Men who are simply riding through don't stop to spend 20 minutes asking a school teacher about their wife's work. The ledger was very interesting. "He asked what you do when you're here," Harriet continued. "How the children respond to you, whether you seem her word, not mine content." A pause. "I told him you seemed considerably more than content. I told him you seemed like a woman who had found her purpose. That was kind. It was honest. There's the difference, and I'm too old to confuse them." Harriet picked her papers back up. He looked like a man who had just understood something important several years after he should have. Catherine set the ledger down. "Harriet, I'm not telling you what to do," Harriet said, with the brisk practicality of a woman who has survived 60 years on her own terms. "I'm telling you what I saw. What you do with it is entirely your affair. A beat. I will say one thing, say it. Don't mistake his noticing for his changing. Noticing is the beginning of a very long road. Some men walk it. Some men just stand at the start and admire the view." Catherine looked at her. "I know," she said quietly. "Good." Harriet picked up her pen. "Now help me draft a letter to the county board about the roof assessment. They've been ignoring it for 6 weeks, and I am finished being polite about it." The letter that arrived on a Thursday morning in mid-February was not from the county board. It was from a man named Aldous Pemberton, Louise's husband, and it was addressed to Catherine directly, which was unusual enough that Dawson presented it to her, with the slightly elevated eyebrow of a butler who has noted something of potential significance. She opened it in the morning room, alone. Aldous Pemberton was writing on behalf of a committee of Richmond families who had formed, in response to the particularly brutal winter, an organization called the Virginia Families Relief Society. They were looking for women of organizational capacity to take on regional coordination roles. Catherine's name had come to them through Louise, through Harriet, through Thomas Fenwick's letter to a cousin in Richmond, who sat on the committee. Her reputation had traveled further than she knew. The letter offered her a formal appointment, a title, a salary, modest but real, the first money she would ever have earned by her own work, in her own right, for her own purposes. She read it twice. Then she sat with it for a long time, looking at the east garden through the morning room window, thinking about what it meant for a woman to be offered a position, not because of who she had married, but because of what she had done. She was still sitting there when Nathaniel came downstairs. At 7, he stopped when he saw her face. "What's happened?" She looked up. She had made, in the 30 minutes since opening the letter, approximately 17 decisions, which was more decisions than she had made in any given month of the previous 3 years. "I've been offered a position," she said, "with the Virginia Families Relief Society, regional coordinator for this county and the 3 adjacent ones." He was very still. "That would require considerable time away from." "Yes, the estate runs well." Her voice was not hard, but it was clear. "You know it does." You've said so yourself. That's not what I came fully into the room, the way he had been doing more often lately all the way in, instead of hovering at the threshold as though he might need to retreat quickly. He sat down across from her. Catherine. This is significant. I know. Have you looked at the letter in her hands? Have you already decided? She met his eyes. I decided the moment I read it, she said it simply, without challenge, because it was simply true. I want it to permission. A pause, not unkind, but definitive. I understand the distinction may be unfamiliar. Something moved across his face. She could not have named it precisely. It was too layered, too compound, and he was too practiced at containment for it to fully surface. But she saw it. The particular expression of a man who is watching a door close and is only now understanding that he had left it unattended for too long. Congratulations, he said. It cost him something to say it. She could tell that, and she was surprised to find she felt neither satisfaction at the cost nor guilt about it. Thank you, she said. She folded the letter. She put it in the drawer where she kept the correspondence that mattered to her. The one on the right side of the desk. Next to Harriet's first letter, and Alice Fenwick's first written page I can read. My name is Alice, which she had asked for, and kept and carried home like something precious. Nathaniel looked at the drawer after she closed it. He looked at it the way a man looks at a door that has just locked. The dinner with the Hawthorns was Frederick's idea, which meant it was Frederick's attempt to repair something he had decided needed repairing, which was itself a form of meddling Catherine found both touching and exhausting. Frederick Whitmore was 34, unmarried, and possessed of the peculiar social genius of a man who cares genuinely about people, and has learned to disguise that caring as charm, because unguarded affection makes Virginia aristocrats uncomfortable. He had always been kind to Catherine quietly, consistently, in ways that did not advertise themselves. He was the only person who had come to find her, on the morning after the anniversary dinner, to say my cousin is a fool in precisely those words, without softening or qualifying the statement. She had liked him very much for it. The Hawthorns were an older couple from the county's northern boundary, respectable, mild-mannered, unlikely to generate drama, which was clearly the point. Frederick had arranged the dinner as a kind of social demonstration that the Whitmores were a functional unit, a united household, a couple who appeared in the same room willingly. He had not consulted either of them before making the arrangement. He means well, Catherine told Nathaniel, when Dawson brought the dinner notice. Frederick always means well, Nathaniel replied, with the flat exhaustion of a man who has navigated his cousin's good intentions for 34 years. It rarely reduces the inconvenience. It was the most natural exchange they had had in 3 years. They both seemed to realize this at approximately the same moment. The silence that followed was different from their usual silences, less managed, less loaded, something closer to ordinary. Silence of two people in the same room who are not actively performing the absence of conflict. I'll write to confirm the date, Catherine said. He nodded. She wrote the note. They did not discuss it further. But at dinner that evening, Nathaniel poured her wine before his own. She noticed. She said nothing, but she noticed. The Hawthorn dinner arrived on a Saturday. Edgar Hawthorn was 60, stout, enormously good-humored, and deeply interested in agricultural drainage systems, which gave Nathaniel an immediate and comfortable topic. His wife, Ruth, was the kind of woman who asked questions and then actually listened to the answers, which Catherine found refreshing and rare. I've heard about your work with the school, Ruth said, over the soup course. From Margaret Holt, actually, though I suspect she intended it as criticism, and it came across as nothing of the sort. What did she say? That you had taken it upon yourself to educate the village children without proper oversight. Ruth's eyes were dry. I told her that oversight without action was just observation, and observation had never repaired a roof. Catherine looked at her with something approaching delight. I like you enormously. I suspected you might. Ruth sipped her soup. My daughter ran a school in Charleston for 11 years. The county board called her a nuisance for the first 4. By year 8 they were trying to take credit for it. A pause. You're doing something real, Mrs. Whitmore. Real things always make certain people uncomfortable. Across the table, Nathaniel was explaining drainage systems to Edgar, but he was listening. Catherine could tell, she had always been able to tell. Even in the old months when the ability had served mostly to hurt her, he was listening with one part of his attention, while giving Edgar the other, and when Ruth said you're doing something real, His hand, resting on the table beside his glass, went very slightly still. She felt his listening like a physical thing. She answered Ruth as if she hadn't. After dinner, the men took their port in the study, and the women remained in the parlor, which was the custom, and which Catherine had never particularly minded, because she found women's conversation, real women's conversation, away from the performance of mixed company, considerably more interesting. "He looks at you differently than he did," Ruth said, without preamble, when the door closed. Catherine looked up from her cup. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Ruth set down her cup with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has been married for 38 years and has seen a very great deal of what that looks like from both sides. "I don't mean that as a simple observation. I mean it as," she paused, considering. "There's a moment, in a marriage, when a man realizes he's been taking something for granted. Some men have that moment and do nothing with it. Some men, Mrs. Hawthorne." Catherine's voice was gentle. "I appreciate I genuinely do. But I have learned these past months to be very careful about measuring change before it has proven itself." She turned her cup in her hands. "Looking differently is not the same as being different." Ruth agreed. "It is not. I have built something," Catherine said, and she was surprised by how clearly she meant it, by how fully formed the words were, as though they had been waiting for an appropriate moment to surface. "In the last months. I have built something that is entirely mine, the school, the relief work, the people who trust me to be there. And for the first time in a very long time, I have not organized that something around a space he might eventually choose to fill." She looked at Ruth steadily. "I am not willing to dismantle that for anyone." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. "Just that. Good," said with the particular emphasis of a woman who has watched other women dismantle themselves for men who did not notice the cost, and who is relieved, genuinely, quietly relieved, to find this one unwilling. The men returned from the study. Nathaniel came to stand near Catherine's chair, not beside her, in the way that would signal a deliberate gesture, but near, the natural proximity of a man who has, without fully deciding to, begun orienting toward a particular point in the room. Edgar Hawthorne noticed. Ruth noticed. Frederick, across the room, noticed and concealed his relief with the practiced subtlety of a man who has been praying for exactly this development for approximately 18 months. Catherine noticed most of all. She stood and said the appropriate things, and moved through the remainder of the evening, with the grace that was as natural to her as breathing, and she felt Nathaniel's presence at the edge of her awareness the entire time, like a tuning fork struck at a frequency she had learned not to answer automatically. She was learning to let sounds settle before deciding whether to respond. She was getting quite good at it. March came in warmer than expected, and with it came Alice Fenwick's mother. Prudence Fenwick appeared at Whitmore Hall on a Tuesday morning, without sending word ahead, something she would never have done in the old months, when the estate had felt like a formal institution rather than a place where a person might actually go. She came with a basket of early herbs from her kitchen garden, and a look on her face that told Catherine something was wrong. Nathaniel was in the study. Dawson brought Prudence to the morning room, where Catherine was working, and left them alone with the particular discretion of a man who understood more about the household than his position required. "Sit down. What's happened?" Prudence sat. She was a broad, capable woman, not much given to distress, which made the distress on her face now more significant. "It's Alice." Catherine set everything else aside. "Tell me." "She came home from school yesterday, wouldn't eat her supper, wouldn't say what was wrong. I thought she was just tired. This morning she told me." Prudence pressed her hands together. "One of the boys from the county school, older than her. He told her that girls who learn to read get ideas above their station. He told her she was going to end up unwanted because men don't want clever wives." Prudence's jaw tightened. "She's 8 years old. She came to the breakfast table and asked me if she should stop going to school." Catherine was still for a moment. Then she stood. "Which boy?" "Mrs. Boy. Prudence." Prudence told her. Catherine crossed to the desk, wrote 3 lines on a piece of paper, folded it, sealed it. "Give this to Dawson on your way out. He'll see it's delivered." She picked up her shawl. "And tell Alice that I am coming to read with her this afternoon. Tell her that I will be bringing her something." "What will you bring?" Catherine looked at Prudence directly. A list of every woman in this country who can read and has built something worth having. Starting with Harriet Caldwell and ending with me. She said it without drama, without performance, only with the absolute steady certainty of a woman who means every word. And then we are going to read every name on that list, together, out loud, until she understands that clever women are not unwanted, Mrs. Fenwick. They are inconvenient, and inconvenient is exactly what a woman with a future ought to be. Prudence Fenwick looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes filled. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me. Go home and tell your daughter I'll be there by 2. She was at the door when she nearly collided with Nathaniel, who had evidently been in the hallway long to have heard at least the last part of that exchange. He stepped back. She moved past him into the hall, reaching for her coat. "I need the carriage. It's ready." He hadn't ordered it yet, which meant he had heard, had anticipated, had moved faster than she had expected. She turned to look at him. He was standing in the morning room doorway, with expression she could not fully read, something between startled and stricken. The look of a man who has just heard something land in a part of him he thought was closed off. "The carriage is ready," he said again, quieter. She nodded. She went. She was halfway down the front steps when she heard him behind her. "Catherine." She turned. He was at the top of the steps, still in his shirt sleeves, no coat, the March air moving past him as though it had business elsewhere and couldn't be bothered to linger. "What you said in there," he paused. To Prudence Fenwick. Another pause longer. "I've been hearing things like that. Things about you for months. Thomas Fenwick, Harriet Caldwell, Frederick, Ruth Hawthorne last night when she said." He stopped himself. His jaw worked. "I have been very slow," he said. "I know that. I am telling you that I know that." Catherine looked at him from the bottom step. He was standing with his hands at his sides. No performance. No management. No elegant Virginia distance. Just a man at the top of his own front steps, speaking plainly because he had finally run out of alternative strategies. "I'll be back before dark," she said. She got in the carriage. She rode to Hatcher's Mill, and she sat with Alice Fenwick for 2 hours, and she read every name on the list. She had written real names. Women she knew. Women in the county and the state and beyond it. Women who had built things worth having in the face of exactly the kind of dismissal that a boy at a county school had decided to deliver to an 8-year-old. She read until Alice's face changed. Until the shadow behind her eyes lightened, not entirely, but enough. Until the child sat up straight in her chair and said, with the particular conviction of someone who has just been given a fact they intend to use, "I'm going to keep going to school." "Yes," Catherine said. "You are." She rode home in the early evening. Nathaniel was waiting. Not in his study, not in the dining room, on the front steps. Coat on this time, standing with his hands in his pockets, watching the drive as if he had been there for a while and intended to be there for a while longer. She stepped down from the carriage. He said nothing. She said nothing. She walked past him and up the steps and into the house, and she did not look back. But she heard him follow, and that for reasons she was not yet ready to examine, made something in her chest do a thing she did not entirely have control over. She chose not to name it. She went to her room and sat at her dressing table, and looked at her own face in the mirror, and thought about Alice Fenwick, and about lists of women who had built things, and about men who stood on front steps at dusk, waiting for something they weren't sure how to ask for. She thought about how much she had changed. She thought about how much she still had left to protect. She took out the letter from Aldous Pemberton and read it again, not because she needed to, but because it reminded her of something essential, that the woman in the mirror was not the woman who had arrived at Whitmore Hall 3 years ago, pale with hope and full of quiet accommodation. That woman had been real, and she had not been weak, but she was gone. In her place was someone who had walked out of a room full of grief and obligation, and had, in the mud of a Virginia winter, built something that bore her own handwriting. That was not nothing. That was everything. She put the letter away. She slept. In the morning she was the first one downstairs. She made no extra cup. She did not wait for him, but he began waiting for her. That was the shift Catherine noticed first, not a grand gesture, not a declaration, but the small persistent evidence of a man rearranging himself around a new center of gravity. Nathaniel began appearing in rooms she occupied. Not intrusively, not with obvious intention, but with the particular frequency that accumulates into meaning when a woman starts paying attention to patterns instead of promises. He was in the morning room 3 days running. He did not speak much. He brought his own correspondence, drank his own coffee, sat across the fire with the focused silence of a man who has decided that proximity is the only currency he currently has available. On the third morning, Catherine looked up from the Pemberton letter she was annotating and found him watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not grief, not the careful management of grief, but something unguarded and slightly stricken, as though he had arrived at a conclusion that cost him something. She went back to her letter without comment, but she felt it. The way you feel a change in temperature, without looking at a thermometer. It was Dawson who broke the silence of that third morning, appearing in the doorway with a card on his silver tray and the elevated eyebrow that Catherine had come to recognize as his version of alarm. "A Mr. Hargrove to see you, ma'am. He says the matter is urgent. He doesn't have an appointment." Nathaniel looked up from his paper. "Which Hargrove?" "He gave the name Silas, sir." The name landed differently on each of them. Nathaniel went still. Catherine set down her pen. Silas Hargrove was the county's most prominent land broker. A man who occupied the particular niche of someone who knew where every property line was drawn and had strong opinions about where they should be drawn instead. He had been attempting, on and off for 7 years, to acquire a parcel of Whitmore land that abutted the village of Hatcher's Mill, a parcel that had been, the old months, purely nominal. A stretch of field and woodland that Nathaniel managed from a distance. It was the same parcel on which Harriet Caldwell's school sat. Catherine stood up before Nathaniel did. "I'll see him." "Catherine, he has come at this hour without an appointment to speak with whoever will receive him." Her voice was composed. "I will receive him." She was in the entrance hall before Nathaniel reached the morning room door. Silas Hargrove was a large man, thick through the chest, with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to entering rooms and immediately assessing the power structure within them. He took in Catherine's presence with a single comprehensive look and recalibrated, not respectfully, but tactically. "Mrs. Whitmore," he inclined his head. "I had hoped to speak with your husband." "My husband is occupied." She indicated the parlor. Please come in." He came in. She did not offer him the best chair. "I'll be direct," Hargrove began, settling himself with the confidence of a man who equates size with authority. "I've made your husband a very fair offer for the Hatcher's Mill parcel. Twice in the past 2 years. He's declined both times." "Yes," Catherine said. "I know," a flicker of surprise. He had not expected her to know. "I'm prepared to increase the offer significantly. It's good land, ma'am, but it's doing very little in its current state. I have investors interested in a mill operation on the creek. Real commerce. Employment for the village. There is a school on that parcel. A small school. 26 children," she said. "As of this week. The number increases monthly." Hargrove smiled with the patience of a man who has mistaken patience for an argument. "Schools can be relocated, can they?" Catherine folded her hands. "And where would you propose to relocate 26 children? Their slates. Their primers. And the teacher who has given 11 years of her life to educating them. The village has a church hall, which is used for church services, community meetings, and storage, which has no stove, no sufficient light, and no capacity for the curriculum Miss Caldwell has built." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Hargrove, you have come to this house, without an appointment, to propose the displacement of a functioning school in order to build a mill. I want to make sure I understand the proposal before I respond to it." He shifted in his chair. The tactical recalibration was happening again, she could see it. The slight adjustment of a man who has entered what he expected to be a soft negotiation, and discovered it is not. "The decision rests with Mr. Whitmore," Hargrove said. "The decision rests with the owner of the land, yes." She let a breath of silence sit there. "But I am the one who has spent the past 5 months working on that parcel. Mr. Hargrove, I am the one who arranged the roof repair, the additional slates, the curriculum expansion. I am the regional coordinator for the Virginia Families Relief Society, and Harriet Caldwell's school is the only educational institution within 12 miles serving families who have no other option." She paused. "I am also the woman who will be speaking with Senator Holt's wife at the Richmond gathering next month. Margaret Holt, as you may know, has recently developed a strong interest in the welfare of Virginia's rural children." The silence that followed this was the particular silence of a man recalculating. Nathaniel was in the doorway. Catherine did not turn around to confirm it. She simply knew, the way she had always known when he was present, a knowledge that had never entirely left her despite everything. Hargrove looked from her to the doorway and back. "I see," Hargrove said. He stood. The easy confidence had not entirely left him, but it had compressed itself, pulled in, become something more careful. "I'll leave the offer open." "That's entirely your prerogative." She stood as well. "Dawson will see you out." When Hargrove was gone, the house held the particular quiet of a room that has just witnessed something that exceeded expectations. Nathaniel came in from the doorway. He sat in the chair Hargrove had vacated, which Catherine found somehow significant, the deliberate claiming of the space from which an opponent had just retreated. "You knew about the parcel." "I manage this household, Nathaniel. I know about everything." "The leverage with Margaret Holt." "Margaret Holt does what is socially advantageous. Championing rural children's education is considerably more advantageous than opposing it, especially in a year when the Richmond papers have been running sympathetic stories about the winter relief efforts." She gathered the papers. Hargrove had left. I had the conversation with her at the Alcott Easter gathering. She was receptive. He looked at her with the expression she had been seeing more frequently, the one she hadn't named yet. The one that existed somewhere between recognition and something rawer and harder to categorize. "You manage that," he said. "All of it. Alone." "I manage most things alone." She said it without any particular inflection, which made it land harder than if she had meant it as an accusation. His jaw tightened. "Catherine, I'm not saying it to wound you." She turned to face him fully. "I'm saying it because I need you to understand something. In the last 5 months, I have built relationships, organized resources, secured commitments, and protected the interests of 26 children and 12 tenant families. I did not do it because I was trying to demonstrate something to you. I did it because it needed to be done." She held his gaze. "But it has the consequence of meaning that I no longer need approval for what I do. Not yours, not the county's. I have already proven the work is valuable. I know that. I'm not sure you do." She set the papers down. "Because you keep looking at me as if the woman I've become is something you're waiting for permission to respond to. And I am telling you, as clearly as I know how to say it, the time for that kind of waiting is finished. I did not wait for it. I stopped waiting for things a long time ago." He was quiet for a long time. "Then, who taught you to argue like that?" The question was so unexpected that she almost laughed. "My father," she said. "He believed women who could not defend a position were at the mercy of everyone who could." She picked up her shawl. He was right. She left him sitting in the parlor. She was at the school by 10. The Richmond gathering arrived in the 3rd week of March. It was Louise Pemberton's event, a day of meetings and meals organized under the banner of the Virginia Families Relief Society, drawing women from 8 counties and several men who had decided, for various reasons of social calculation, that being seen at such a gathering was advantageous. The attendance was larger than last year, which Louise attributed to the winter's hardship, and which Catherine suspected had at least as much to do with the growing social currency of being seen to do something real. She traveled to Richmond in the Whitmore carriage. Nathaniel rode alongside it for the first 3 miles, which was not a thing he had done before, and which required no explanation, and was given none. At the point where the road forked toward Richmond, he reined in. She did not lower the carriage window. He did not stop the carriage. They simply looked at each other through the glass, her face composed, his doing something complicated. And then the carriage moved on, and she turned her attention to the notes in her lap. She did not permit herself to look back. The gathering was everything Catherine had expected, and several things she hadn't. Louise Pemberton was a force of nature. Wrapped in expensive silk, she had the organizational instincts of a field general and the social grace to make those instincts feel like hospitality, which Catherine recognized and admired. She placed Catherine at the head table without consultation, introduced her to the assembled women as the architect of this county's most comprehensive relief program, and then stepped back and let Catherine speak for herself, which was the mark of someone who understood that real credit giving requires getting out of the way. Catherine spoke for 12 minutes. She had prepared for 20 and cut half of it because she had learned from Harriet that people retained what was sharp and forgot what was long. She talked about Alice Fenwick. Not her name, she asked no one's permission to use a child as a symbol, but the fact of her. 8 years old, could not read in September, read fluently by January, had been told by a boy twice her age that being clever made her unwanted, had sat at a breakfast table and asked her mother if she should stop going to school. The room was completely silent. She kept going, Catherine said. She kept going because someone told her, clearly and without equivocation, that the people who find clever women inconvenient are the people who cannot keep up with them. A pause. We are here today because we have decided to be inconvenient. I suggest we take that very seriously. The applause was sustained. Margaret Holt, seated 4 chairs down, clapped with everyone else, and caught Catherine's eye, and gave her a look that contained, for the first time, something approaching genuine respect. Catherine received it with a nod and moved on. It was during the afternoon sessions, when the formal meetings had broken into smaller conversations over tea, that she found herself in the corner of the room with a woman she had not expected to find there. Eleanor Whitmore's sister. Clara Vane was 38. A widow herself now, slim and pale-haired like her sister, but with a directness in her eyes that the portrait above Nathaniel's fireplace did not capture. Catherine recognized her because she had seen her, twice, at events in the early years of the marriage events, where Clara had been polite but remote, which Catherine had understood and not resented, because grief takes its own shapes, and Clara's shape had been withdrawal. They looked at each other, across the edge of polite circumstance. Clara moved first. She crossed the room, set down her cup, and said, without preamble, "You were very good just now, thank you." I don't say that as a social nicety. Clara held her gaze. I say it because I've heard a great deal about you this year. From people who have worked with you. From a pause. From my nephew, Nathaniel's cousin Frederick. Frederick speaks too freely. Frederick, Clara said, is the only honest person in your husband's immediate circle, which makes him invaluable even when it's inconvenient. She looked into her cup. I owe you an apology. I was not kind to you, Clara continued, in the early years. I was protective of Eleanor's memory, which is a reasonable thing to be, but I took it out on you in ways that were not reasonable. I treated you as an obstacle rather than a person. You treated me as a replacement, Catherine said, quietly, not harshly, which is different from an obstacle but equally unfair. Clara absorbed this without flinching. Yes, that's exactly right. She looked up. I've been watching what you've built this year. The school, the relief work. What you said today about that child, she paused. Eleanor would have. She would have loved what you're doing. I want you to know that. She had no patience for women being made small. The words landed in a place Catherine hadn't expected. She looked at Clara Vane and felt, for the first time in connection with Eleanor's name, something that was not pain and not competition, but something closer, a strange, sideways kinship with a woman she had never met and had spent 3 years being measured against. Thank you, she said. Nathaniel is, Clara stopped. Tried again. He has spent 4 years in a particular kind of darkness. I watched it. I was part of maintaining it. Honestly, we all were. The family, his friends, because it felt like honoring her. But there is a difference between honoring a memory and living inside it. Yes, Clara's voice was tight. And I think he is beginning to understand that, slowly, painfully. A beat. He asked me last month what Eleanor would have thought of you. Catherine's breath caught. What did you tell him? Clara met her eyes. I told him that Eleanor would have thought you were extraordinary. And then I told him that the more important question was what he thought, and that he had better answer it before the answer stopped mattering. The room continued around them, cups and conversation, the pleasant, industrious noise of women doing real work. Catherine stood in it and felt something shift in her chest, something she had been holding at a careful distance for months. Not toward hope, exactly. Toward honesty, toward the admission that something was happening, even if she was not yet certain what it would become. What did he say, she asked. He said he didn't know. Clara picked up her cup, which is the most honest thing I've heard him say in 4 years. She returned from Richmond on a Thursday evening. Nathaniel was in the entrance hall when the carriage arrived. Not waiting by design or so, she initially thought. He was speaking with Dawson about something that concerned a delivery, and he looked up when the front door opened, and the conversation with Dawson ended with the particular abruptness of something abandoned mid-sentence. How was the gathering productive? She handed her coat to the waiting footman. The society is expanding its work into 4 additional counties in the fall. I've been asked to develop the coordination model. Will you accept? Yes, he nodded slowly, something working behind his eyes. There's something I need to tell you, he said. The tone of it stopped her. Not the words were ordinary enough, but the quality of his voice. the particular weight in it that she associated with things that mattered and were difficult. "Tell me," she said. He did not answer immediately. He waited until Dawson had withdrawn, until the entrance hall was empty of everyone but the two of them and the fire in the grate, and the several years of complicated silence between them. "I wrote to Clara." In February, he continued, before the Richmond gathering. "I didn't know she was going to attend. I wrote to her because I needed to." He stopped. "I needed to talk to someone who had known Eleanor, who had known her and could also see me clearly. And Clara has never had any patience for my self-deception." "What did you write to her?" He exhaled. "I asked her whether she thought I had used Eleanor's memory as a way of avoiding the present, as a way of," he looked at the floor, then back at her, "as a way of keeping myself at a safe distance from everything that might be real." The fire crackled. She said yes. His voice was flat, without hesitation. She said yes, and then she said that the cruelest part was that Eleanor would have been furious with me for it, that Eleanor had wanted me to live, that she had made Clara promise before she died to make sure that I didn't turn her into a reason to stop. Catherine could not speak for a moment. "I didn't know that," she said finally. "Neither did I." Something moved across his face. Yes, but grief of a different kind. Not the consuming backward kind she had watched for 3 years. But something that faced forward, that contained loss without being entirely defined by it. "Clara told me at Christmas. I have been trying to understand what it means. What it means for the choices I've made." He looked at her, then, directly, with the full weight of his eyes, and Catherine felt it land in a way she had stopped expecting anything to land. "I know it's too late to undo the dinner," he said. "I know it's too late. For a great deal of things I should have done differently. I know that what I have been doing for 3 years was not a small wrong. It was a fundamental one." He paused. "I am not saying this because I expect anything from you. I am saying it because you deserve to hear it." Said plainly, without any management, without any expectation attached. She looked at him for a long moment. This was a new thing, not the apology he had apologized before, carefully in the morning room in December. This was different. This was a man who had taken something apart and looked at its components honestly, with softening the findings. "Nathaniel," she kept her voice even, "what are you asking for?" "I'm not asking for anything. You are standing in the entrance hall at 9 o'clock in the evening, having clearly prepared what you intended to say." She met his eyes. "You are asking for something. What is it?" He held her gaze. "Permission," he said, "to try. Not to undo what happened. Not to go backward. In the way I wasn't." The entrance hall was very quiet. She understood, standing there, that she was at a precise and unrepeatable moment, that what she said in the next 10 seconds would determine the shape of something neither of them could fully see yet. And she understood also with the clarity that the past 5 months had built in her, carefully, at the cost of considerable pain, that she could not answer that question tonight. Not because she didn't feel anything, but because feeling something and building something were different enterprises. And she had learned the hard way to tell them apart. "Go to sleep, Nathaniel," she said. It was neither a yes nor a no. He understood that. He nodded. He let her pass. She went upstairs. She sat at her dressing table for a long time, without looking in the mirror. The letter arrived on a Monday. Not from the Relief Society. Not from Harriet. Not from any of the sources Catherine had learned to expect correspondence from. It came in a cream envelope with a Richmond postmark, addressed in a hand she did not immediately recognize, and it sat on her desk for 2 hours before she opened it, because something in the handwriting made her pause. When she finally read it, she understood the pause. It was from Margaret Holt, not a social note, not the careful coded communication Catherine had learned to navigate from Virginia County wives. This was something else, something direct and privately human, which she would not have expected from Margaret in any circumstances. Margaret had heard from Dorothea Alcott that certain members of the county set were planning to formally petition the school board to investigate Harriet Caldwell's operation at Hatcher's Mill. The grounds cited were irregular funding sources and a curriculum that exceeded the established parameters for village education. The real grounds, which no one was stating in writing, were that the school had grown too influential, that Catherine's involvement had given it a social weight the original objectors had not anticipated, and that Silas Hargrove's associates on the county board had found a procedural mechanism that did not require them to confront the issue directly. They were coming for the school. Not today. Probably not this month. But the mechanism was in motion. And Margaret, whatever her complicated relationship with Catherine, had enough genuine feeling about the education of children to send a warning. "I do not do this lightly," she wrote at the close. "But I have a granddaughter who will be 8 years old next spring. I would like her to have options." Catherine sat with the letter for a long time. Then she went downstairs. Nathaniel was in the study. He looked up when she came in. She never came into the study. That had been an unspoken boundary for 3 years. His space, Eleanor's books on the shelves, and the fact of her crossing that threshold with purpose in her step told him before she spoke that something had shifted. She handed him the letter. He read it. His face changed. "Hargrove," he said flatly, "his associates. He's found a way to move without appearing to move." She stood across the desk from him. "I need access to the estate's legal correspondence. I need to know every document connected to the Hatcher's mill parcel. And I need it tonight." He was already moving. He stood, crossed to the shelves, pulled a bound leather file without hesitation. He knew exactly where it was, because for all his failings in the category of human perception, Nathaniel Whitmore ran his estate with the precision of a man who took his land seriously. He opened the file on the desk. They stood on the same side of it, not across from each other, the way they had stood in every room for 3 years. Together, side by side, looking at the same documents, and it was this small, unplanned collateral shift that felt, to Catherine, more significant than any of the deliberate conversations. "Here," he pointed to the property survey. "The parcel has a covenant attached from my grandfather's bequest. Any use change requires approval from 3 neighboring landowners, not just the county board. Hargrove's associates may not have checked that." She looked at the document, looked at the names. "Yes, and the Caldwells, and the Alcotts." He looked at her. "Dorothea Alcott's family has owned the adjacent land for 60 years. Catherine looked at the covenant. Then she looked at him. "You knew about this covenant, yes. You knew when Hargrove came the first time, when he came the second time. You knew he could not have moved without the neighbor's consent." "Yes," he held her gaze. "I also knew that none of those neighbors would consent. I know Thomas Fenwick. I know the Alcotts. I knew the offer was dead before Hargrove finished making it." She stared at him. "Then why?" she said, very carefully. "Did you decline on grounds of sentimental attachment rather than on legal grounds? Why didn't you simply tell him the covenant made the sale impossible?" Something shifted in his expression. "Because I was not paying close enough attention," he said, "to any of it. The parcel, the covenant, the school on that land. I knew about the covenant because I know every document in this file, but I had not connected it to anything real, to anyone real." Until she had. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. Catherine looked back at the survey. She traced the covenant clause with her finger, the legal language flowing under her touch, like something that had always been there, patient, waiting for someone to use it. "I need to write to Dorothea Alcott tonight," she said, "and to Thomas Fenwick. And I need Frederick's help drafting the formal response to the board before they have a chance to put anything on record. Frederick is in Richmond until Thursday. I'll write to him tonight. He can review it by letter." She straightened. "We will need the original bequest documents, the survey, and the county board's procedural rules for covenant properties. I can have all of it on this desk in an hour." She turned to leave. Catherine did not turn. "Thank you," he said, "for coming in here." She stood still for a moment. The study smelled like old books and the particular dust of careful preservation, the smell of things kept for a long time in a small space. "You have the covenant," she said. "I have the relationships. The school doesn't need us to be anything other than what we are." She paused. "We just need to be it at the same time." She left. He spent the next hour pulling documents from shelves, and when she came back with her correspondence materials, the desk was organized and the lamp was turned up, and he sat in the chair beside the one she took, without being invited and without requiring permission. They worked until midnight. Neither of them spoke of anything except the case. But when she rose at the end and gathered her papers, Nathaniel reached for the lamp to dim it, and his hand briefly passed close to hers on the desk, and neither of them moved away, and the contact lasted exactly 1 second, before she picked up her papers and he turned down the lamp. 1 second. She carried it upstairs with her like something she had not expected to find and was not yet certain what to do with. She sat with it for a long time before she slept. Outside, Virginia moved through the dark without asking anyone's permission, and Whitmore Hall held its breath. And in two separate rooms, two people lay awake in the particular silence of those who have come very close to something and are not yet sure whether to reach toward it or step back. Neither of them reached, not yet, but neither of them stepped back. And in the darkness of a house that had spent 4 years facing the wrong direction, that was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. The documents were filed with the county board by Wednesday morning. Frederick had worked through 2 nights on the legal language. Catherine could tell from the quality of his penmanship in the final draft, which deteriorated from his usual elegant script into something that still managed to be precise, because Frederick Whitmore was constitutionally incapable of imprecision regardless of how little sleep he had managed. The argument was clean and airtight. The grandfather's covenant governed any use change on the Hatcher's Mill parcel. 3 neighboring landowners held consent rights, and all 3 had submitted formal letters of objection to any alteration of the land's current educational purpose. Dorothea Alcott's letter was the one Catherine read twice. The old woman had written 4 pages in a hand, so firm it looked carved rather than written, and she had not confined herself to the legal question. She had included, in her 3rd page, a detailed account of what she called the particular cowardice of men who use procedural mechanisms to accomplish what they lack the courage to attempt directly, and she had named Silas Hargrove's associate on the county board, a man named Cornelius Pratt by name, and with specificities that suggested she had been waiting for an appropriate opportunity to use the information for some time. Catherine had sent Dorothea Alcott the finest box of early spring flowers the Whitmore greenhouse could produce. Dorothea had sent back a note that read, "Don't thank me with flowers. Come to dinner. Bring yourself, not your husband's name." She went on a Friday, alone, and sat for 3 hours at the table of a woman who had outlived 3 husbands, raised 6 children, navigated 60 years of Virginia society without compromising herself on anything she considered essential, and who talked to Catherine with the frankness of someone who had reached an age where pretense was simply too time-consuming. "You're standing at a decision," Dorothea said, over the soup. Catherine looked up. "Not the school. The school is settled. Pratt won't move against a covenant. He's not that foolish. I mean the other decision." Dorothea's eyes were sharp as filed glass. "The one about your husband. There is no decision about my husband. There is always a decision about a husband." Dorothea broke her bread with the unhurried authority of a woman in her own house. "The question is whether you're making it consciously or letting it make itself, which amounts to the same outcome, but one of them you can live with more easily afterward." Catherine was quiet. "I have been watching marriages for 60 years, Dorothea continued. "Good ones and terrible ones, and the ones in between, which are the most common and the most interesting. What you and Nathaniel Whitmore have is it's in the middle category. But the middle category has 2 directions. It can go better or it can go worse, and which direction it goes depends almost entirely on what the woman decides. That seems an unfair allocation. It is completely unfair." Dorothea looked entirely unbothered by this. "Women hold marriages together and always have. The question is not whether it's fair. The question is what you want." She set down her bread. "What do you want, Catherine?" The question sat between them like a lit lamp, illuminating, unavoidable, making everything it touched visible. "I want what I've built," Catherine said carefully. "I want to keep it." A silence. "And I want—" She stopped. Started again. "I want him to be someone I can trust with what I've built. I want him to be someone who sees it, who sees me." She paused. "I don't know yet if he is." Dorothea nodded slowly. "That," she said, "is the most honest thing I've heard in this room in quite some time." They finished dinner. They drank their tea. Dorothea walked her to the door and pressed her hand and said, very quietly, "Don't decide from fear, my dear. Not fear of losing him and not fear of trusting him. Decide from what you actually know." A pause, "And come back when you've decided. I make very good cake." Catherine rode home through the early April dark and thought about what she actually knew. She knew he had pulled the documents without hesitation. She knew he had sat beside her until midnight. She knew that 1 second at the lamp had not been accidental. She knew he had written to Clara, had asked the hard question about himself, had received the hard answer and had not run from it. She also knew that knowing what a person had done was different from knowing who they would continue to be. She was still thinking about the difference when the carriage turned up the Whitmore Drive, and she saw, through the window, that every lamp in the study was lit. He was at his desk when she came in. not working. The desk was clear. He was sitting with a small portrait in his hands, the one from the drawer, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway, without the surprise of a man caught at something private. He had the settled look of a man who has been waiting and has decided to stop managing the fact of the waiting. He set the portrait face down on the desk, not hidden, deliberately face down. The difference mattered. How was dinner with Dorothea Alcott? She is the most interesting person in this county. Catherine came fully into the study, no hesitation, as she had learned, and sat in the chair beside the desk, the one she had occupied when they worked on the covenant documents. She asked me what I wanted. What did you tell her? The truth. She looked at the portrait face down on the desk. What were you doing? Looking at it. He didn't touch it. I do that sometimes. I used to do it every day. Now it's less often. He met her eyes. I was thinking about what Clara told me. What Eleanor made her promise. That you should live, yes. He was quiet for a moment. I have been trying to understand what it means. To live in the way she meant. Not just to manage the estate. Not just to occupy space in a house. He looked at his hand. I think she meant something more specific than that. Catherine waited. I think she meant this. He gestured at the desk, at the room, at the space between them. What happened last week? The documents, working until midnight. You coming in here. I think she meant engagement. With what's real. With who's real. That's a generous interpretation of a promise you weren't present for. It's the only interpretation I can live with. His voice was direct. Not pleading, not performing. And I am trying, Catherine. Very imperfectly and very late, but I am trying to understand what I owe you. Not as a matter of social accounting. As a matter of he stopped. As a matter of something I don't have a precise word for. Sheets winced. Yes, he said that. She looked at him. He looked back. The fire was low. The lamps were high, and the room smelled of books and the particular dust of things that had been kept in close proximity to grief for a very long time. I am not ready to have the conversation you want to have, she said. I know, I need more time. I know that too. And I need, she paused, finding the exact words because the exact words mattered. I need you to understand that more time doesn't guarantee a particular outcome. I am not withholding a yes, I may have a no, I haven't decided yet. Something crossed his face sharp. Quickly managed. I understand, do you? I understand that I have no right to expect anything. He looked at her steadily. And I understand that I want something I may have permanently forfeited. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and I'm learning to hold them both, without demanding that one resolve the other. She stood. At the door she paused. The portrait, she said. Face down. That's new, she said. She left. April moved through Whitmore Hall with the industrious energy of a season that had work to do and no patience for anything that wasn't growing. The school expanded to 31 students. 3 girls who had previously been kept home by families, convinced that female education was an extravagance, had enrolled in the same week their mothers had spoken with Prudence Fenwick, who had apparently become an unexpected advocate, the kind whose persuasiveness derived from a specific and unassailable personal experience. Catherine told Harriet on a Tuesday afternoon, and watched Harriet press her lips together and look at the ceiling in the way she did when she was containing an emotion she found embarrassing. 31, Harriet said. 31. When I started this school there were 7. A pause. 3 of them were boys the parish sent me, because they had nowhere else to put them on weekday mornings. Where did they end up? One farms his father's land. One is a clerk in Richmond. One, Harriet's mouth curved slightly. One is a member of the county board, which is how I know how county boards actually work. Catherine stared at her. You never told me you had a contact on the board. You never asked. Harriet, you handled it beautifully without him. Harriet was entirely unrepentant. And he is better used when people don't know he exists. It's a strategic resource, not a first resort. Catherine sat back in her chair and looked at the woman across the table, 60 years old, ink-stained fingers, the most reliably surprising person she had ever met, and felt a surge of affection so uncomplicated it almost startled her. You are extraordinary, she said. I am practical, Harriet said, which in a woman of my age and position amounts to the same thing. She was gathering her coat to leave when Harriet said, without looking up from the enrollment ledger, he came by again. Monday morning, before the children arrived, Harriet kept her eyes on the ledger. He walked through the whole room, looked at everything, the slates, the primers, the copy of the Bible that Alice uses. He stood at the window for a while. She turned a page. He didn't say much. But before he left, he asked me what the school needed most. What did you tell him? Books. Harriet looked up. A proper library. Not a shelf. A library organized, labeled, with enough breadth that the older children have somewhere to go when they've exhausted what we have. And he said he would see what could be done. A beat. On Thursday, 6 crates arrived. From his personal library, and 3 he had apparently sourced from Richmond cellars. 240 books, Catherine. Sorted by subject and labeled in his own hand. The silence in the room was very full. He did that, Catherine said. He did that, without telling me, without telling anyone. Harriet closed the ledger. I thought you should know. Catherine walked to the window. Outside, the April light was doing something generous with the new leaves on the trees behind the schoolhouse, and she stood in it for a moment, feeling the weight of 240 books, as though they were physically in her arms. He had not told her. He had not sent a note, had not mentioned it at dinner, had not arranged for her to find out in any way that would require her to respond to the gesture as a gesture aimed at her. He had done it for the school. For Harriet. For 31 children who needed somewhere to go when they had exhausted what they had. She thought about what Dorothea Alcott had said. Decide from what you actually know. She was beginning to know more. The second twist came from a direction no one had anticipated. It was Frederick who brought it. Frederick, who showed up at Whitmore Hall on a Wednesday afternoon with the look of a man carrying something he'd rather not be carrying, who found Catherine in the morning room and Nathaniel in the study, and evidently decided that what he had to say required both of them in the same room at the same time. He came to the morning room first. Catherine looked at his face and felt the particular alertness that comes when someone you trust appears. With news they are measuring carefully. Sit down, Frederick. I'd rather stand. He turned his hat in his hands. There's something you need to know, both of you. Nathaniel first, is he in the study? He was an hour ago. I'll get him. He went. He came back with Nathaniel 2 minutes later, Nathaniel, who had clearly been pulled mid-thought, and whose expression shifted when he looked at his cousin's face. What's happened? Nathaniel said. Frederick set his hat on the table. There's talk, he said, in Richmond. Not county gossip, this is different. It's coming from a specific source, and I want you both to understand that before I say it, because the source matters. Say it, Catherine said. Frederick looked at her. Someone has been suggesting, in certain Richmond circles, that Catherine's work with the Relief Society has been that her judgment is compromised, that she has been operating outside her proper sphere in ways that reflect poorly on the Whitmore name. He paused. The suggestion is that Nathaniel should formally withdraw his support for her society work, that he should that a statement of some kind would be appropriate, clarifying the appropriate limits of a wife's public activity. The room went very still. Who? Nathaniel said, one word. Frederick hesitated. Hargrove, Catherine said, not directly. Frederick looked at her with something that was almost apology. The name being used in connection with it is it's coming through Hargrove's associates. Yes, but the original source, he stopped. It appears to originate with someone who knew the family. Who knew Eleanor? Catherine looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel's face had gone to that particular stillness she associated with real anger, not the managed kind, not the controlled kind, but the kind that sits below the surface of a man who has very strong feelings about very few things and is currently encountering a threat to one of them. Give me the name, Nathaniel said, James Alderley. Frederick said it quickly, like pulling a thorn. Eleanor's former, he courted her briefly, before you married her. He's been in Richmond for the past year. He sits on 2 charitable boards and he has a grudge, Nathaniel said flatly. He has had a grudge for 15 years, and he has apparently found a vehicle for it. Yes, and his position. Enough of one to make the suggestion land, if you don't respond to it. Frederick looked between them both. The question is how you respond. Another silence. Catherine spoke first. I will respond to it by continuing my work. Her voice was level. I will not adjust my activities in response to a wounded man's social maneuvering. That is not a position I am willing to negotiate. No one is asking you to negotiate it, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. No one is asking you to adjust anything. His voice was entirely certain. I will handle Alderley. How? By making my position clear, he met her eyes. Publicly, unambiguously, if you'll allow it. The phrase landed between them with all of its specific weight, if you'll allow it. Not a formality. An actual question. The question of a man who has recently learned the difference between acting on someone's behalf and acting with their knowledge and consent. What does publicly mean, she said. It means I intend to write to the Richmond paper, to the Relief Society's board, to every member of this county's social infrastructure who is currently evaluating which direction this wind is blowing. He didn't look away. I intend to say, in writing, that Catherine Livingston Whitmore's work in this county represents this estate's values and has my complete and unambiguous support. Frederick was watching them both with the stillness of a man who knows he is in the presence of something significant and has the sense not to interrupt it. And if your support costs you social capital, she asked, then it costs me social capital. Hargrove's associates can find someone else's land to pursue. He was very direct. Catherine, I have been a poor steward of the things that matter in this house. I have managed the estate's soil and timber and accounts with a great deal more care than I have managed other things. A pause. I am trying to do better. This is one specific concrete way I can do better. Let me do it. She looked at him for a long time. Frederick appeared to have stopped breathing. Write the letter, she said. I want to read it before it's sent. Of course, he exhaled. She looked at Frederick. You'll help with the language. Willingly. Frederick picked up his hat with the barely contained relief of a man who has watched a very precarious situation resolve in the right direction. I'll draft it tonight. She read the letter the following morning. He had written it himself, in his own hand, and left it on her desk in the morning room without ceremony, no note attached, no request for immediate response, just the letter folded and waiting for her at 6:30 when she came downstairs. She read it standing up, still in her morning coat, with the fire just beginning to catch. It was 4 paragraphs. The first established his relationship to the Whitmore estate and his position in the county, which was necessary context and which he stated without inflation. The second addressed the work of the Virginia Families Relief Society and Catherine's role in it with a specificity that told her he had paid close attention. He named the school, the 31 students, the covenant protection, the winter relief work, the 4-county expansion. He had done research. He had written about her work as though he understood it because he did. The third paragraph was the one that made her hands go still. My wife has demonstrated, in the course of this past year, a capacity for leadership, compassion, and organizational intelligence that has materially improved the lives of the families of this county. She has done this with my awareness and my support. Any suggestion to the contrary is false. Any suggestion that her activities require curtailment reflects a profound misunderstanding of what this estate stands for and what this family values. The fourth paragraph addressed Hargrove's associates and Alderley indirectly but unmistakably, in language that was legally precise and socially devastating, and that bore Frederick's fingerprints in its construction, and Nathaniel's character in its refusal to soften the central point. She set the letter down. She picked it up again. She read the third paragraph twice more. My wife has demonstrated. He had not written Catherine. He had not written Mrs. Whitmore. He had written my wife, which was specific and possessive and warm, in a way that landed differently than she had prepared for. And she stood in the morning room with the early April light coming through the window, and felt something unexpected distance. She maintained, begin not collapse, because she would not allow a collapse but shift, move, rearrange itself around a new understanding. She put the letter in her correspondence drawer. She wrote one word on a piece of paper and left it on his desk. Send it. The response from Richmond took 11 days. In those 11 days, Catherine went to the school 4 times, attended a Relief Society meeting in the next county, received 3 letters of support from women she had met at the Richmond gathering, and had exactly 2 conversations with Nathaniel that were not about practical matters. The first was brief. She found him in the library on a Sunday evening, sitting with a book open but unread in his lap, and she came in and sat in the chair across from him and said, "Why did you write my wife instead of my name?" He looked up. He thought about it. He did not reach for an easy answer. "Because it was more accurate," he said finally. "The letter was about what I value, what this household values. It wasn't a character reference from a distant admirer. It was from a husband." A pause. Those words mean something. I wanted to mean them. She sat with that. Did you mean them? Everyone. She left without responding. But she sat with his answer for 3 days straight, turning it over the way you turn over something you've found in an unexpected place, trying to determine whether it's what it appears to be or something that only resembles it. The second conversation happened on a Wednesday, 9 days after the letter was sent. And it began not with either of them, but with a visitor. Clara Vane arrived without warning. She came in the afternoon, was received by Dawson, and was shown to the parlor, where Catherine found her standing at the window with the particular stillness of a woman who has traveled a distance to say something specific and is organizing herself before saying it. Catherine closed the parlor door. "What's happened?" "Thing has happened." Clara turned. "I came because I wanted to, because there's something I should have said sooner." She looked at Catherine directly. "When I told you, in Richmond, that Eleanor would have thought you were extraordinary, I meant that. But I didn't tell you the rest of it." Catherine waited. "Eleanor knew in the last months that she was dying." Clara's voice was steady, but it cost her something. She knew before Nathaniel did. She kept it from him because that was Eleanor. She protected the people she loved from things they couldn't change. But she talked to me, a pause. She talked to me about what would happen afterward. She was very clear about what she wanted for him. You told me that she wanted him to live. Yes, but she was more specific than that. Clara looked at her hands. She said that the right woman for Nathaniel was someone who wouldn't need him to complete her. Because she knew, she had always known, that he was the kind of man who could mistake devotion for possession, who could mistake a woman's love for an obligation to remain small. Her voice tightened. She said she sometimes worried she had been too accommodating, that she had loved him so fully and so completely that he had never had occasion to encounter the particular growth that comes from loving someone who is also genuinely free. The parlor was very quiet. "She said that," Catherine said. "She made me promise to tell it to whoever came after, if anyone looked up. I have been very poor at keeping that promise, because every time I looked at you in the early years, I saw someone taking her place, and I could not get past that to see what she actually was." Her eyes were wet. "You are what Eleanor described." "Exactly. You are someone who built something while he was looking the wrong way, and you did it without his permission or his assistance, and you are exactly what she wanted for him." Catherine sat down, not because her legs were unsteady, because the weight of what Clara had just said required something solid beneath her. "Does he know she said this?" she managed. "No." Clara pressed her lips together. "I'm telling you first. Because you are the one who needs to decide what it means. Not him." She straightened. "He is the one who made the mistake. You are the one who gets to decide whether the mistake defines what comes next." A long silence. Catherine asked, "Why come now?" Clara hesitated. "Because of the letter he sent to Richmond." Her voice was quiet. "Because when I read it, I recognized something in it. The way he wrote about your work, the specificity of it, the understanding. Eleanor would have recognized it too." She met Catherine's eyes. "He is paying attention, Catherine. Finally, fully the right kind of attention. And I think you know that. And I think the real question is whether you're willing to let that matter." Catherine looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood and crossed the room and did something she had never done. She embraced Clara Vane briefly, firmly, the embrace of two women who have been on opposite sides of the same grief and have finally found their way to the same side of it. Clara held on for exactly 1 second before stepping back with the brisk self-possession of a woman who has never been entirely comfortable with her own emotions. "Good," Clara said, straightening her sleeves. "I haven't decided anything," Catherine said. "No, but you've stopped deciding against it, which is different." Clara picked up her gloves. "That's enough for now." She stayed for tea. She and Catherine talked for 2 more hours about things that had nothing to do with Nathaniel, about Eleanor's music, about Clara's own life since her husband died, about the school and the children, and Harriet Caldwell, whom Clara had apparently heard of through 3 degrees of separation, and found immediately fascinating. When she left, the house felt different, not resolved, not finished, but different. Like a room in which a window has been opened for the first time in years and the air, slightly stale and slightly too warm, has begun to move. The response from Richmond arrived on Thursday morning. It came from 2 directions simultaneously, which was either coincidence or the particular efficiency of social networks operating at speed. The first response was from the Relief Society's board, a formal statement expressing confidence in Catherine's leadership and announcing the 4-county expansion with her named as coordinating director, signed by Louise Pemberton, by 3 other board members, and Catherine read this twice by Margaret Holt, who had apparently joined the board in the preceding week, without informing anyone of her intention to do so. The second response was personal. It was addressed to Nathaniel, from a man Catherine did not know, a senior member of the Richmond social establishment, a figure whose opinion carried the particular weight of someone who has earned respect over time, rather than inherited it. He wrote to say that Nathaniel's letter had been read with admiration by several people of consequence, that the work of the Whitmore household under Catherine's direction had been noted and valued, and that James Alderley's suggestions had been received with the skepticism they deserved from everyone who had taken the time to look at the actual record. Nathaniel brought both letters to the morning room. He set them on her desk without comment. She read them both. He watched her read them. "It's done, yes." She set the letters down. She looked at him. Really looked, the way she had been very carefully not looking for weeks, because looking fully at Nathaniel Whitmore had always cost her something she needed to be careful about spending. He had changed. She could not pretend otherwise. Not dramatically, not with the theatrical transformation of a man in a novel, but in the way real change actually happens incrementally, specifically, in 100 small choices that accumulate into someone recognizably different from who they were. He came downstairs early. He knew the names of the tenants' children. He had pulled documents without being asked and sat beside her without being invited and written a letter that described her work with the accuracy of a man who had been paying close attention for months. He had put Eleanor's portrait face down. He had written "my wife" as though he meant it. She looked at him, and she thought about what Dorothea had said, "Decide from what you actually know," and she thought about what Clara had said, "You've stopped deciding against it," and she thought about Alice Fenwick, reading 4 pages, and Harriet Caldwell's ink-stained fingers, and the 240 books sorted in his own hand, and the 1 second at the lamp that neither of them had moved away from. She thought about the woman she had been when she arrived at Whitmore Hall. She thought about the woman she was now. She stood up. "Walk with me," she said. He went still. It was such a specific request, not the general territory of household management. Not a practical collaboration, but something personal. Something that required him to simply be present with her in ordinary time. Now, he asked now. He followed her out of the morning room, through the entrance hall, and out the front door into the April morning, where the air was warm enough, and the grounds of Whitmore Hall were doing what they always did in April quietly, without asking permission, becoming something better than they had been. They walked without speaking for several minutes. She did not take his arm, but she walked beside him, close enough that the distance between them was no longer the managed, deliberate distance of the previous 3 years. Close enough that when the path narrowed near the East Garden, neither of them moved apart. "I am not ready to forgive the dinner," she said. "I know. I may not ever be entirely ready. I know that too. But I am," she paused, found the words. "I am willing to acknowledge that you are not the same man who made that toast. And I am willing to not decide against the possibility of what comes next." She looked straight ahead. "That is what I can offer you right now. Not more." He was quiet for a long time. "It's more than I deserve," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "A beat. I'll take it," he said quietly. She almost smiled. Almost. They walked the rest of the path in silence, and the April morning moved around them with the patient indifference of a world that had not been waiting for this particular moment, but was content to contain it. And Whitmore Hall stood behind them in the strengthening light, like a house that was learning, slowly, what it was supposed to be. She did not take his arm. But when they reached the end of the path and turned back toward the house, she did not step away from him either. And that for now was exactly enough. The walk changed something. Not everything. Catherine was not a woman who confused a morning's progress with a resolved history, and she had learned too much in the past year to mistake proximity for safety. But the walk changed the texture of that followed. Something in the air between them loosened. The way a knot loosens when you stop pulling against it and simply work it with patient hands instead. Nathaniel stopped hovering at doorways. He came fully into rooms now, sat in chairs, stayed. He asked about the school by name, not as a social inquiry, not with the careful distance of a man performing interest, but with the specific questions of someone who had read the enrollment ledger and remembered what he read. He asked about Alice Fenwick. He asked about the 4-county expansion and whether Louise Pemberton's organizational model could scale to the additional territory. He asked about Harriet Caldwell's roof, which was showing new trouble along the east eave, and before Catherine could answer, he told her he had already spoken with the carpenter. He was paying attention, specifically, consistently, without requiring acknowledgement for it. She noticed every instance. She kept her own counsel about what she noticed. It was Harriet who forced the first real reckoning. Catherine arrived at the school on a Tuesday in late April to find Harriet sitting at her desk with 2 letters open in front of her and the look of a woman who has received competing pieces of information and is waiting for someone with relevant knowledge to help her sort them. "Read these," Harriet said, not a request. The first letter was from the county board. It acknowledged the covenant restriction on the Hatcher's Mill parcel, declined to pursue further investigation of the school's operations, and this was the part Catherine had not expected. Formally recognized the school as a site of community educational benefit, which carried certain protections and certain funding eligibilities it had not previously held. When did this arrive? Catherine kept her voice even. Yesterday morning. Read the second one. The second letter was from the Virginia State Assembly's Education Committee. It referenced the Relief Society's expansion work and invited Harriet Caldwell as the school's founding teacher and Catherine Livingston Whitmore as regional coordinator to present a model of rural educational development at a Richmond assembly in June, in front of the full committee. With the possibility of state-level funding attached, Catherine set both letters down. "He did this," she said. Harriet looked at her without particular surprise. "The board letter has his fingerprints on it. He knows someone on that committee. He's known them for years and never used the connection for anything before. And the assembly letter came through Louise Pemberton, but Louise told me who made the introduction." A pause. "He has been working on this since February, Catherine. Quietly, without telling you, the same way he had delivered the books. Without telling anyone. Without requiring her to respond to it as a gesture." She stood at the schoolroom window and looked at the grounds where 31 children learned things they had been told were above their station, and she felt the accumulated weight of everything she had been carefully not deciding press against her chest, with a force that was no longer ignorable. "He could have told me," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. Yes, Harriet's voice was gentle for the first time Catherine could remember. "He chose not to. He chose to let the work speak without attaching his name to it in a way that would put you in the position of owing him something. A beat. That is a man who has been paying attention, not just to what you do, to how you need to receive things." Catherine pressed her hand flat against the windowsill. "I don't know what to do with that," she admitted. "Yes, you do." Harriet picked up her pen. "You're just afraid of doing it." The word landed with the precision of something thrown by someone who knows exactly where it will hit. Afraid. Catherine had been afraid in the early years, afraid of being invisible, afraid of being insufficient, afraid of loving a man who was permanently oriented toward a ghost. She had transmuted that fear into movement, into work, into the school and the society, and the 31 children, and the 4 counties, and the letter to Richmond that bore her name and no one else's. She had become, in the process, someone who was not afraid of very much. But this specific thing, the thing of allowing herself to believe that Nathaniel Whitmore had genuinely changed, had genuinely seen her, had genuinely chosen her in the specific and deliberate way she had needed and been denied. This was a different kind of fear. The fear of someone who has been injured by a particular mechanism and is being asked to trust that the mechanism has been repaired. She turned from the window. "I need to go home," she said. Harriet nodded. She did not say anything else. She was, Catherine reflected, the ideal person for a moment like this, full of opinion and utterly disciplined about when to deploy it. She found him in the library, not at his desk, standing at the shelves, reshelving books with the unhurried attention of a man with nowhere urgent to be. He turned when she came in and read her face in a single look and became very still. "Harriet showed me the letters," she said. He set the book in his hand on the nearest shelf. "Catherine." "No," she came further into the room. "Let me say what I came to say, and then you can speak." She had prepared this on the carriage ride home, and she was going to say it cleanly. "You have spent 6 months doing things, specific material things, without announcement, without requiring me to acknowledge them as overtures. The documents, the midnight work, the books for the school, the assembly introduction, the board letter." She stopped. "I know all of it. I want you to know that I know." He was watching her with the total stillness of a man who has learned to receive things without interrupting them. "I have been very careful," she continued, "not to allow those things to move me faster than I was ready to be moved. Because I know what it cost me to stop waiting for you. I know what I built in that space. And I am not willing to dismantle it in exchange for the possibility that things might be different now. She met his eyes. But I have been sitting with something Harriet said to me an hour ago, and I cannot unknow it. What did she say that I'm afraid? She said it plainly. And she's right, not of you specifically, of this, of letting this matter. Because if I let it matter and I'm wrong about what it means, the cost is it's not the same cost as before. It's worse. Because I know myself now. I know what I'm capable of and what I deserve. And if I give that knowledge into the keeping of someone who doesn't honor it, she stopped. Steady. That is a wound I don't know if I could survive the same way. Then don't give it, he said. She blinked. Keep every bit of it, he said. The work, the society, the school, the knowledge of what you're worth. Keep all of it. I am not asking you to put any of that down. He took one step toward her, only one, measured and deliberate. I am asking you to let me stand beside what you've built. Without owning it, without directing it, just beside it. Another pause. Beside you. The library was very quiet. You put Eleanor's portrait face down, she said. Yes, is it still? Come and see. She crossed the room. He opened the drawer of the desk. The portrait was there. Face up she had expected face down, had braced for face down as confirmation, and the face up hit her differently than she anticipated. But it was not in the drawer alone. Beside it was a folded piece of paper in Eleanor's handwriting. She recognized it from the one occasion she had seen a note of Eleanor's years ago. A letter she wrote me, Nathaniel said. A month before she died. Clara gave it to me at Christmas with the rest. He looked at it without picking it up. She told me she hoped I would find someone who would make me look forward instead of back. She was very specific about it. She said backward-looking was a kind of cowardice she had never expected from me, and that she refused to permit it from beyond the grave. He almost smiled. It was a complicated, real smile, the kind that contains grief and warmth in the same space. That was very much Eleanor. Catherine looked at the portrait. Eleanor's painted eyes, privately amused, privately warm. She sounds extraordinary, she said. And she meant it, without jealousy, without competition, with the clean sincerity of someone who has finally gotten far enough from the wound to see the person at its center. She was, Nathaniel said. He held her gaze. Differently, completely differently. But I am done comparing, Catherine. I am done living in the comparison. Eleanor was real and she mattered, and I will love her until I die. And you, he stopped. His voice, for the first time in all of this, broke slightly. You are standing in front of me, alive, and extraordinary in ways I was too blind to see for 3 years. And I am asking you directly, plainly, without any management. He paused. Can we begin again? The question was so simple. After all of it, the toast, the years, the portrait, the midnight documents, the books, the letters, the walk, the almost so simple. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Alice Fenwick, reading 4 pages, and looking up with joy that had nothing to do with anyone's permission. She thought about Harriet's ink-stained fingers, and Dorothea Alcott's cake, and Clara Vane pressing her hand. She thought about the list of women who had built things. She thought about the morning room, and the coffee she stopped making for him. And the space that had opened in stop making, the space she had filled with herself. She thought about what she had become. And she understood finally, completely, that the woman she had become could afford to say yes. Not the woman who had arrived at Whitmore Hall at 28, pale with hope and full of quiet accommodation. That woman could not have afforded it. That woman would have dissolved back into waiting the moment he asked. But this woman, this specific woman who had walked into Hargrove's negotiation without flinching, who had stood at a Richmond assembly and spoken about inconvenient women, who had built a thing that bore her own handwriting, this woman could say yes and remain entirely herself. The yes would not cost her what it would have cost before, because she was not the same. We cannot begin at the beginning, she said. What happened, happened. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't ask you to. I know, but we can begin from here. She held his gaze. If you understand what here means, it means the school continues. The society continues. The 4 counties, the coordination work, the board position, all of it continues. It means I do not ask your permission, and I do not wait for your approval. It means if you have a concern, you say it plainly, and we discuss it as equals. She paused. It means I will not perform contentment I don't feel. If I am frustrated or hurt or angry, I will say so. Directly. I would not want otherwise. I know you believe that now, she said. I need to see you believe it over time. Then give me time. His voice was steady. I will spend it showing you. She looked at him. He looked back. The library held them in the particular quiet of a room that has witnessed the negotiation of something real, and is content to keep the record of it. Put the portrait back in the drawer, she said. He closed the drawer. Not face down, she added. He opened it slightly, turned the portrait face up, closed it again. She understood that. Eleanor did not need to be hidden. She needed to be in the right place, kept, honored, not erased, but also not enlarged beyond the space that was honestly hers. Face up in a closed drawer was exactly right. It was the place of a true thing that had its proper dimensions. All right, Catherine said. Just that. Just all right. She was not a woman who felt the need to ornament what was already complete. He exhaled, not with relief exactly, but with the particular release of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally set it down in the right place. He did not reach for her hand. She did not offer it. They were beginning from here, and here was honest, and honesty required that the distance between them close at the rate it actually closed, rather than the rate they might wish. But when she turned to leave the library, he walked out with her, beside her, into the hall and toward the evening, and he held nothing back, and she withheld nothing essential, and that was the right beginning. May arrived. Alice Fenwick turned 9 years old, and read a full passage from A History of Virginia to the assembled school without stumbling once. Harriet sat in the back row and looked at the ceiling in her characteristic way. And Catherine, beside her, did not bother to conceal the fact that she was moved. 9 years old, Catherine said quietly, 9 years old and reading history. Harriet looked sideways at her. She'll be running something. By the time she's 30, she'll be running everything. Well, Harriet smoothed her skirts. That's the point, isn't it? The June assembly in Richmond came and went. Catherine presented the 4-county model to the state committee in a room full of men who had expected, she could tell, someone more deferential, and who received instead a woman with figures and outcomes and a specific plan for replication that answered every anticipated objection before they could raise it. The funding was approved by the end of the second day. Not everything she had asked for. More than she had realistically expected. She and Harriet took dinner in Richmond that evening, just the two of them, and talked for 3 hours about everything except the assembly, because the assembly was finished and what lay ahead was more interesting. Nathaniel had come to Richmond. Not to the assembly she had not asked him, and he had not offered, understanding without being told that the work was hers, and the stage was hers, and his presence would have changed the weight of the room in ways she did not need. He came afterward, to the inn where she and Harriet were staying, and he sat at the table with them for dessert, and listened to Harriet describe, with her characteristic lack of sentimentality, exactly what she thought the committee had gotten right, and where their assumptions were naive. He listened with complete attention. At one point he asked a question, a good one, specific, about the committee's funding criteria, and Harriet looked at him for a long second before answering, and Catherine could see her revising something, adjusting an assessment, arriving at a new position on a person she had been watching for months. On the carriage ride home, in the dark, Catherine said, "You asked her a good question. She knows things I don't." He looked out the window. It seemed worth acknowledging. She looked at his profile in the dark. "You asked her the same question you would have asked Frederick," she said. "You treated her the same way." He turned to look at her. "She's considerably more knowledgeable than Frederick. Most people are." She paused. "But most men in your position would not have asked her anything. They would have smiled politely and waited for it to be over." He was quiet for a moment. "I am trying," he said, "to not be most men in my position." She looked at him in the carriage dark and thought, "Yes, I know, that is the thing that changes this." She did not say it aloud. Some things were still finding their way from her chest to her voice, and she had learned the value of not rushing the transit. But she let her shoulder rest, lightly, against his for the rest of the journey home. He did not move away, neither did she. The twist came in August, at the anniversary dinner. She had known it was coming. The date was on the household calendar. It came every year, and this year she had said nothing about it, and made no alternative arrangements. She had waited to see what he would do. He came to the morning room 3 days before. "The anniversary dinner," he said. "Yes, I want to do something different this year." She set her pen down. She looked at him. "What did you have in mind?" He sat. He had a piece of paper in his hand, not a letter, something shorter. He held it for a moment before speaking. Last year I stood in that room and said something that I cannot undo. I have thought about it every day since, not with guilt, though that too, but with the specific understanding of a man who said a true thing in entirely the wrong way, at entirely the wrong time, to the permanent damage of someone who deserved better. She waited. Eleanor was the only woman I had loved up to that point, he said. That was true when I said it. But I said it as if it would always be true, as if there was no capacity in me for anything else. And I said it in front of 200 people who were looking at you, and he stopped. I made you invisible, in your own home, in front of people whose respect you had earned. Nathaniel, I am not finished. He looked at the paper. I want to make a toast this year. To the people in this house who have built something worth celebrating. The school, the society, the tenants. Alice Fenwick, who is 9 years old and reading history, he looked up, and to you by name. With the full account of what you've done and who you are, he paused. If you'll allow it. The room was very still. She thought about last year, the ivory silk, the candlelight, his eyes moving past her to the portrait, the 8 words that had finished something in her chest. She thought about who she had been in that moment, and who she was in this one. She thought about the fact that she no longer needed his toast to know her own worth. That was the difference. That was everything. She could receive it now, not as the validation she had been starved for, but as the acknowledgement she had earned from a man who had finally learned how to see, offered to a woman who had stopped needing to be seen and had chosen, from that position of completeness, to let it matter anyway. 2 conditions, she said. He leaned forward. Fewer than 200 guests. She held up a finger. The dinner is for the people who actually matter to this estate. The tenants, Harriet, the Fenwick family, the Alcotts, Frederick Louise Pemberton and her husband, Clara if she'll come. Another finger. And you say it without looking at the portrait. I haven't looked at the portrait in months. I know, she met his eyes. I want to hear you say it. I will not look at the portrait, he said. I will look at you. She nodded once. Then yes, she said, do it. The August dinner was 43 people. No Margaret Holt. No Senator Holt. No Silas Hargrove or his associates, or the careful architecture of county status performing itself across white linen. 43 people who had worked alongside Catherine Livingston Whitmore in the specific and unglamorous ways that build real things. Harriet with her ink-stained fingers, Thomas Fenwick with his repaired roof, Prudence Fenwick, who had become an unexpected advocate, Alice, who was 9 and watching everything with enormous dark eyes, Dorothea Alcott, who had eaten her cake and come anyway, Clara, who had kept a promise that was long overdue. The dinner was warm, loud, in the way that real warmth always is, people talking over each other, children who probably should have been in bed an hour ago, getting one more dinner roll, Harriet and Dorothea Alcott, discovering a mutual opinion about county board governance that they were conducting at some volume in the corner. Catherine watched it and felt in her chest something she had not felt in the dining room of Whitmore Hall in 3 years. Like she belonged here, like she had made this, not found it, not been granted it, not performed her way into it, but made it, with her own hands and her own stubbornness, and the particular refusal to remain invisible that had begun on a night when her husband raised his glass and looked the wrong direction. Nathaniel rose. The room quieted. He had that quality, always had, always would, the natural authority of a man who occupied space with conviction. But tonight it was different. He was looking at no one but her. I made a toast in this room 1 year ago, he said. I made it badly. I said a true thing in a way that was profoundly wrong, and the person most harmed by it is sitting at this table, and every person in this room either knows what I did or has been changed by the woman I failed. The room was absolutely still. Alice Fenwick, 9 years old, was watching him with the focused intensity of a child who understands that something important is happening and intends to remember it. Catherine Livingston Whitmore has spent 1 year building things that will outlast both of us. He kept his eyes on her. 31 children who can read. Families who had no resources who have them now. A 4-county organization that the state assembly has chosen to fund because the case she made was irrefutable. A pause. She built all of it while I was looking somewhere else. She built it without my help and without my attention and without my acknowledgement. She built it because she is exactly the kind of woman who builds things whether or not anyone is watching. Catherine's hands were still in her lap. She had prepared for this. She was not prepared for this. I see her now, Nathaniel said. His voice was level, but it was costing him something. I want this room to know that I see her. I want her to know that I see her. He lifted his glass. To Catherine, who chose herself when I failed to choose her, and who has given me the privilege, against all reasonable expectation, of trying to be worthy of what she built. The room raised their glasses. Dorothea Alcott, 80 years old and entirely unsentimental, raised hers with the decisive motion of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this. Harriet raised hers without looking up from her plate, which was Harriet's version of profound emotional response. Clara raised hers and caught Catherine's eyes across the table, and held them for a moment that contained everything she had said in the parlor, and everything Catherine had done with it. Alice Fenwick raised her water glass, with the solemn gravity of someone participating in something historic. Catherine raised her glass. She looked at Nathaniel, at the man who had taken 4 years to learn to face forward, who had spent 1 year slowly, imperfectly, convincingly becoming someone she could trust, who was standing in the dining room of Whitmore Hall, looking at her and no one else, and she felt beneath the composure and the hard-won self-knowledge and the careful architecture of her own rebuilt life, something warm and certain and entirely unafraid. To what we're building, she said. Not to him alone, not to the past, to what they were building forward, together from exactly here. He understood. Everyone at that table understood. They drank. That autumn, when the enrollment at Hatcher's Mill School reached 40, Harriet finally let the county board put a plaque on the door. She had resisted it for months, on the grounds that plaques were for finished things, and the school was not finished. She allowed it when they agreed to put 2 names on it, hers and Catherine's, side by side, in letters the same size. Dorothea Alcott attended the small ceremony, and afterward told Catherine it was about time and ate 2 pieces of cake. Alice Fenwick, who was in the front row, read the plaque aloud to the child standing next to her who hadn't learned to read yet. That evening, walking home from Hatcher's Mill, Catherine passed the spot on the road where she had first driven to meet Harriet, almost a year ago, in the dark of that first February after the toast. She had been a woman bracing herself then for the cold, for the day, for the long work of becoming someone she recognized. She was not bracing now. Whitmore Hall was lit when she arrived. Nathaniel was at the door, not waiting exactly, not the careful hovering of the early months, but present the way he had learned to be present, naturally, as though he had simply been going about his evening in the same space, and the door happened to be where he was. How was the ceremony? Harriet cried. She handed her coat to the footman. She'll deny it. Don't bring it up. Understood. She looked at him, at the man, who had learned to stand beside things rather than in front of them, who had learned that the most powerful thing a person can do for someone they love is to make room for everything that person is, rather than the portion that fits comfortably. She looked at him, and she thought, this is what beginning from here looks like. Not perfect, not without history, but real moving forward. Built on what I know. She took his arm as they walked inside. Not the gesture of a woman who needed to be held up. The gesture of a woman who had chosen to walk beside someone because she wanted to, because she was whole and he was changed, and the future they were building was something she had helped design, on her own terms, with her own hands. The door closed behind them. Whitmore Hall held them both, and this time it held them equally. And in the years that followed, when people spoke of what Catherine Livingston Whitmore had built, the school, the society, the 4 counties, the 40 children, the women who came after her, who built their own things in the space she had made possible, they always said the same thing, that she had done it by refusing to disappear, that she had stood in the ruins of being unseen and built something so undeniably visible that the world had no choice but to look. She had not waited to be chosen. She had chosen herself first completely, without apology, without permission, and that had made all the difference.